It's a tattered, yellowed sheet of paper, different from the rest. The handwriting, while slightly faded, is strangely captivating. It's as if the words on this essay don't just tell a story, they beg to be heard. You can't help but feel a chill run down your spine as you read through the words, realizing that this piece of writing is unlike anything you've ever encountered before. It's gripping. It's poignant. But there's something more to it, a deep, unsettling feeling that lingers. The essay is from 1990, but the writer has been missing for over 30 years. The questions swirl in your mind. Who wrote this? Where are they now? Why have they been gone for so long? And what happened to them? This is exactly what happened to a high school teacher named Mr. Thomas Miller, a man whose curiosity was about to plunge him deep into a mystery that had gone cold for decades. As he stood there, his heart raced with an unsettling realization. This wasn't just a forgotten assignment. This was something more, something important. The words on this sheet of paper were not only a glimpse into the past, but a possible clue to a long-lost individual whose story had been buried for years. And just like that, the teacher became the detective. He couldn't stop himself from trying to solve the riddle. What did this essay mean? Why had no one ever heard of this writer before? He had to know, and as you're about to find out, the answers would change everything he thought he knew about his own life. Now, I know you didn't click on this video by accident. You saw that title, Teacher Discovers Essay from 1990, Writer Still Missing, and you felt the pull. Maybe it was the mystery, maybe it was the feeling of unease, but you want to know the truth. You want to know what happened to this missing writer. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll have answers. But be warned, the story isn't as simple as it seems. No, this is no ordinary tale of a missing person. This is a puzzle, a web of secrets, and every step closer to the truth only raises more questions. I can tell you, I know exactly what you're feeling right now. You want to uncover the mystery, just like Mr. Miller. You're probably asking yourself, who was this person? Why are they still missing? What does this essay have to do with the disappearance? Trust me, by the end of this video, you're going to get all the answers. But you have to stay with me until the very end. This isn't a story that can be rushed. Every twist, every turn, is a piece of the puzzle, and if you leave now, you'll miss it. So let's talk about the essay. It wasn't like any ordinary high school paper. Sure, it was written by a student just like the hundreds of other essays Mr. Miller graded over the years. But this one was different. The student's name, Matthew Bradford, was written at the top of the page, but beyond that, there were no other marks or identifiers. There was no date, no grade, just the title, The Hidden Voice. It was short, just a few paragraphs long, but it packed an emotional punch. It was filled with depth, mystery, and a sense of impending doom that sent chills down Mr. Miller's spine. At first glance, it seemed like any other assignment, an essay on the power of words. But as Mr. Miller began reading, he realized there was something eerily personal about it. The essay wasn't just an analysis of literature, it was a cry for help. And then, at the very end, the final sentence left him speechless. If anyone ever finds this, they'll know where to look. That was it. No further explanation. Just those haunting words. Mr. Miller's instincts told him that this essay was no mere coincidence. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that it wasn't just a random student paper, it was a clue. A cryptic message left by someone who had vanished, someone who might have left behind a trail of secrets just waiting to be uncovered. But who was Matthew Bradford? What happened to him? And why had his story been hidden for so long? At this point, you might be wondering, why should you care? Why should you stick around for the whole story? Let me tell you this, there's more to this than just solving the mystery of a missing person. This essay, this story, is a reflection of a much deeper question we all face. What happens when we get lost? Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, spiritually, when we disappear from the world, leaving behind only fragments of who we once were. And as you follow Mr. Miller's journey into this mystery, you're going to find that it's not just Matthew Bradford who's missing. There are threads that tie this mystery into the lives of others, people who thought they were forgotten, but who were never really lost. Now, I know you've probably got a ton of questions running through your mind, just like Mr. Miller did when he first found that essay. Who was Matthew Bradford? Was he just another troubled teenager who disappeared? Or was there something more sinister at play? Why was this essay left behind for someone to find, and why after all these years? But the most important question is, what happened to him? I'm not going to leave you hanging. Not yet. Stay with me. You're about to uncover something that's going to change everything you thought you knew about this story, about this mystery, and about the people involved. There are hidden truths that are going to be revealed, and I promise you, the answers are going to shock you. But first, we need to go back to 1990. It was a different time, long before the age of social media, long before everyone's life was on display for the world to see. Back then, people could disappear, fade into the background, and no one would ever notice. There were no cameras following their every move, no digital trail of their actions. They could vanish, and no one would ever ask why. But Matthew Bradford's story isn't like that. His disappearance was different. And now, over 30 years later, his essay has resurfaced. It was just a small piece of paper, but it's the key to unlocking a mystery that's been buried for decades. I promise you, the more we uncover together, the more you're going to wish you had never clicked away from this video. But there's one thing I need to warn you about before we go any further. Once you start diving into this story, there's no turning back. You're going to be asking questions, digging deeper, and uncovering things that might be too much to handle. You'll be forced to confront uncomfortable truths. And yet, you won't be able to look away. The mystery of Matthew Bradford is about to unfold, and it's going to draw you in like nothing you've ever experienced before. So, are you ready to go on this journey? To dive deep into the unknown and finally uncover the truth behind the missing essay and its mysterious writer? Keep watching, because the answers are closer than you think. But be warned, once you know the truth, you'll never be able to look at the world in the same way again. The mystery of Matthew Bradford will leave a mark on you, and I can promise you, this is only the beginning. Stay with me. You won't regret it.mr. Miller hadn't been looking for a mystery. In fact, for the past few years, his life had been relatively predictable. He was the kind of teacher who found comfort in routine, someone who believed that the quiet rhythms of the school year, the steady flow of grading papers, and the familiar faces of students gave him a sense of purpose. He taught English literature, and while it wasn't the most glamorous subject, it allowed him to do what he loved, share his passion for words and stories with others. But there was something more to Mr. Miller's life, something he wasn't ready to confront. Beneath his calm exterior, there was a sense of restlessness, an undercurrent of dissatisfaction that he couldn't quite shake. His life was missing something, and he didn't know what that something was. His relationships, for one, were strained. He had been married once, many years ago, but the marriage ended in divorce. The reasons were complicated, but as he reflected on it, Mr. Miller knew it came down to a deep, unspoken disconnect. His ex-wife, Karen, had always felt like an afterthought in his life, and he had been too consumed with his work to notice how distant they had grown. Now, all these years later, they barely spoke. He had moved on, but it was clear that the emotional scars of the failed marriage still lingered in the back of his mind. And then there was his relationship with his students. It was a professional one, of course, but he prided himself on being approachable. He wasn't the kind of teacher who got too emotionally involved, but when it came to Matthew Bradford, there was something different. From the moment Mr. Miller read that essay, something about the boy's words stuck with him. It was almost as if they were written for him specifically, as if Matthew had known he would read them one day. And that feeling, that inexplicable connection, was what pushed him to dig deeper. Matthew Bradford was an enigmatic student. He wasn't one of the standout kids, he didn't excel in the traditional sense of academics, nor was he a troublemaker. He was just there. Quiet, introspective, and a little offbeat. Mr. Miller remembered him vaguely, but he hadn't thought much about him until that essay resurfaced. Matthew's record showed that he had been a solid student, his grades average but consistent. Yet there was a sense of detachment in his demeanor that made him stand out in a different way. He kept to himself, always on the fringes of the class, never drawing too much attention. But in the writing, in the words of that essay, something raw and urgent had come through. The more Mr. Miller thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. There were no signs that Matthew had ever been in trouble, no record of anything suspicious that might explain his disappearance, but the essay hinted at a different story. As Mr. Miller dug deeper into the missing person report, he began to unravel a picture that made less and less sense. Matthew had vanished on the night of a school dance, a seemingly innocent event. But there were gaps in the timeline that no one had bothered to address. The night of the dance, Matthew had been seen talking to a few students, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, he was gone. No one knew where he had gone, and there were no signs of struggle. It was as though he had simply vanished into thin air. The teachers, his friends, his parents, they all seemed convinced that Matthew had just run away. It wasn't uncommon for teenagers to pull stunts like that. But there was something about Matthew's disappearance that didn't sit right with Mr. Miller. He wasn't the type of kid who would just leave without a word, not without some kind of explanation. And then there were the rumors. They weren't much, but the whispers around the school had always been there, just beneath the surface. Some said that Matthew had been involved with a group of older students, kids from the local college who had a reputation for being a little off. Others spoke of strange interactions between Matthew and a teacher from the art department, Mrs. Langley. According to some, they had been seen together more than once, speaking in hushed tones, sharing private conversations that made others uncomfortable. But no one could ever pin down what was going on between them. Mrs. Langley, a woman in her early 40s, had always been a bit of an enigma herself. Her reputation was a little too polished, too perfect, and there was something about the way she carried herself that made people suspicious. She was well liked by the administration and the students alike, but there was an aura about her that couldn't be ignored. She was the kind of person who made people wonder what was lurking behind her calm, composed exterior. Could there have been something more between her and Matthew? Was there a connection that went deeper than what anyone realized? As Mr. Miller began speaking to the other teachers and students who had been around at the time of Matthew's disappearance, he started to uncover more inconsistencies. One student, an older boy named Ryan, claimed to have seen Matthew arguing with someone on the night of the dance. But when Mr. Miller asked Ryan for more details, the story changed. Ryan couldn't remember the specifics, only that Matthew had been angry. Was it a fight with another student? Was it connected to his disappearance? Or was there more to the story that no one was willing to admit? And then there were the strange phone calls. Mrs. Bradford, Matthew's mother, had received multiple calls on the night he disappeared, but when she answered, no one spoke. Just heavy breathing and the occasional sound of someone shifting in their seat. Could these calls have been connected to Matthew's vanishing? Could someone have been watching him before he disappeared? The further Mr. Miller dug, the more tangled the web became. He began questioning whether the essay was a message or a warning. Had Matthew been trying to tell him something with his words, something that was still out of reach? The haunting final sentence of the essay lingered in his mind, echoing with an urgency he couldn't ignore. If anyone ever finds this, they'll know where to look. But where was that place? And what was it that Matthew had been trying to escape? There were no answers yet, just more questions, and each discovery seemed to pull Mr. Miller deeper into a mystery that was spiraling out of control. As the days passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was someone watching him, someone who didn't want him to uncover the truth. The strange occurrences in his own life only intensified. Phone calls in the middle of the night, anonymous notes slipped under his door, and the growing sense that someone was always just out of sight, waiting for him to make the wrong move. The more Mr. Miller pushed, the more the walls seemed to close in around him. But he couldn't stop now. He was too close to the truth, too close to understanding what had really happened to Matthew Bradford. Or was he? Had he misinterpreted the signs? Were the pieces of this puzzle really connected, or was he just chasing shadows? The deeper he went, the more he realized that not everything about Matthew's disappearance added up. And that feeling, that creeping unease that followed him everywhere, told him that there was more at play here than he could ever have imagined. And so, the questions kept piling up, and the pieces of the puzzle remained scattered. Each time Mr. Miller thought he had found the answer, something else slipped through his fingers. The deeper he went, the more he wondered. Was he simply uncovering the past, or had he unknowingly stepped into something much darker, something that would leave him and anyone else who dared to seek the truth irreparably changed? Mr. Miller's investigation into Matthew Bradford's disappearance was spiraling out of control. What had started as a simple curiosity about an old essay soon felt like something far more dangerous. As he dug deeper, the walls around him seemed to close in, with every new discovery seeming to raise more questions than answers. He began to feel like a man who was being drawn into an undertow, unable to fight the current, helplessly pulled deeper into something that wasn't just a school mystery, it was a tangled web of secrets, lies, and betrayal. It wasn't long before he realized that someone didn't want him to uncover the truth, and whoever that someone was, they were willing to go to extreme lengths to keep him from finding out. The first major obstacle came when Mr. Miller returned to the school library, determined to see if he could find any records on Matthew's past. He had hoped to uncover anything that might explain why Matthew had disappeared. But when he asked the librarian for access to the school's archives, he was met with an unsettling response. The librarian, a quiet woman named Mrs. Parker, seemed unusually tense, and she hesitated before telling him that the records for the class of 1990 had somehow been misplaced. She made it sound like a minor inconvenience, but Mr. Miller didn't buy it. It didn't take a detective to sense the tension in her voice, the way she quickly redirected him to other files as though eager to move the conversation along. Something didn't sit right with him. He left the library that afternoon with an unsettling feeling gnawing at his gut. Why would the records for that year suddenly be gone? And why had Mrs. Parker seemed so evasive? The more he thought about it, the more he was certain that there was something the school was hiding. But it didn't stop there. The very next day, Mr. Miller received a cryptic email, sent from an anonymous address. The message was simple, just a few words: "Stop digging or you'll regret it." It felt like a warning, one that he couldn't ignore. At first, he brushed it off as an empty threat, a desperate attempt to intimidate him into backing down. But the more he thought about it, the more the words weighed on him. Someone didn't want him to get closer to the truth, and that made him realize just how deep this mystery went. Who could have sent the email? And what did they know that he didn't? Despite the ominous warning, Mr. Miller pressed on. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions, not when he was so close. But just when he thought he was getting closer to an answer, something strange happened. He went back to the school to retrieve a file he had requested from the administration. It was a folder containing details about Matthew's life, his grades, his family history, any extracurricular activities. The file was supposed to be available for review, but when Mr. Miller arrived to collect it, he was told that it had gone missing. The secretary, a woman named Ms. Griffin, assured him that the file had been there just the day before. But now, nothing. It had simply disappeared. Mr. Miller tried to remain calm, but the anxiety in his chest was palpable. He was beginning to feel like he was chasing ghosts, like every step forward only led to another dead end. Was someone tampering with the records? And if so, why? What was in that file that was so important? It was around this time that Mr. Miller started to receive phone calls that he couldn't explain. They were late at night, always from an unlisted number, and when he picked up, there was no one on the other end, just a faint clicking sound followed by silence. At first, he thought it was just a prank, but the calls started coming more frequently. One night, as he stared at the phone in his hand, the screen flashing with an incoming call from an unknown number, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This wasn't just an annoying coincidence. Someone was watching him. It was at this point that he turned to Mrs. Langley, the art teacher whom some of the other students had mentioned in passing during their conversations about Matthew. Mrs. Langley had always been a little mysterious, but she was well liked by the faculty, and Mr. Miller thought she might have insight into Matthew's life. He had no proof, but his gut told him that she was somehow involved in the puzzle, and he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. But when he approached her, her response was cold, almost dismissive. She claimed to barely remember Matthew, despite being a teacher at the school during his time. She mentioned him in passing, referring to him as a quiet, inconspicuous student who never caused any trouble, but there was something in her voice, something sharp, almost defensive, that made Mr. Miller uneasy. When he pressed her for more information, she became increasingly evasive, changing the subject abruptly, as though she was desperate to distance herself from any mention of Matthew. Mr. Miller couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, And that suspicion only grew when she warned him to stop looking into Matthew's past. "There are some things better left buried," she said, her voice low and serious. The way she said it didn't sound like advice, it sounded like a threat. That night, after his conversation with Mrs. Langley, Mr. Miller found himself back at his desk, staring at the essay again, trying to make sense of it. If anyone ever finds this, they'll know where to look. But where was that place? What had Matthew been trying to tell him? As he sat there, replaying everything in his mind, a strange thought hit him. What if he had been wrong all along? What if Matthew's disappearance wasn't about running away, or about a simple mistake? What if it was connected to something far bigger, something darker than he could have ever imagined? It was then that he received another email, but this time, it wasn't a warning, it was a clue. The email contained a link to an old, archived news article, one that he had never seen before. The headline was simple: "Unsolved Mystery, Local Artist Found Dead Under Mysterious Circumstances." Mr. Miller's pulse quickened as he clicked on the link. The article described the tragic death of a well-known local artist from the 1980s, someone who had been part of the same small art community that Mrs. Langley had been a part of. The details were vague, but there was one striking detail that caught his attention. Before her death, the artist had been seen in the company of a young student who had vanished shortly afterward. The name of that student? Matthew Bradford. Everything froze. Was there a connection between Matthew's disappearance and the death of this artist? Had Mrs. Langley been involved in something much darker than anyone had realized? And who was sending Mr. Miller these cryptic messages? He thought he was getting closer to the truth, but with every answer came more questions. The mystery was deepening, and the closer he got, the more dangerous it seemed. Just when Mr. Miller thought he was about to crack the case, he received one final, chilling message. It wasn't an email, a phone call, or a note. It was a package, left anonymously at his doorstep. Inside was a single photograph, a photograph of Matthew Bradford, taken just hours before he vanished. But in the background of the photo, there was something unmistakable, something that hadn't been there before. A shadow. And that shadow wasn't alone. Now, everything Mr. Miller thought he knew about Matthew's disappearance was being questioned. The more he uncovered, the more he realized that this was only the beginning, and the deeper he went, the more dangerous it became. What had Matthew discovered before he vanished? And who was trying to keep the truth buried? The more Mr. Miller dug, the more questions piled up, and the more dangerous it became to keep looking. The photograph was a blow to Mr. Miller, but it wasn't just the image of Matthew that unnerved him. It was the realization that whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to stop him, they were playing a far deeper game. As he stared at the photo, trying to make sense of the shadow lurking in the background, a familiar chill crawled up his spine. The picture wasn't just eerie, it felt deliberate, like a silent message taunting him, daring him to get closer. But who was behind this twisted game? And why did they keep pulling him deeper into a world of secrecy and deceit? It wasn't long before the mystery took another dark turn, one that would pull someone else into the web, a person Mr. Miller never expected to become involved. Karen, his ex-wife, had always been a distant part of his life, someone who existed in the periphery of his world. They hadn't spoken much in the years since their divorce, except for the occasional exchange about their shared history or the rare awkward phone call. But something strange had been happening with Karen recently, something that piqued Mr. Miller's attention. She had started reaching out to him more frequently, not in a personal way, but with a sense of urgency, as though she needed to talk to him about something important. He had dismissed it at first, assuming it was just her way of reaching out after years of silence, but when she asked to meet him in person, he began to wonder if there was more to it. When they finally sat down at a quiet cafe, Karen's face was drawn, her usual calm demeanor replaced by an unease that made Mr. Miller uneasy. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, she dove straight into the conversation, her voice low but firm. "I know what you're doing. I know you're digging into Matthew Bradford's disappearance," she said, her eyes scanning the room nervously, as if someone might be listening. "And I don't think you realize just how dangerous it is." At first, Mr. Miller thought she was merely reacting to the general atmosphere of tension that seemed to follow him, but there was something in her eyes, something that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. She continued, her voice shaky. "I'm not supposed to be telling you this, But I think you need to hear it. I've been getting strange things too. The phone calls. The letters. Someone's watching us, and I don't know why. But I think it has to do with what you're investigating." The air between them thickened, as Mr. Miller tried to process her words. Karen wasn't someone who made things up. If she said she had been receiving strange messages, he had no reason to doubt her. The realization hit him like a freight train. Whatever Matthew had uncovered wasn't just a school mystery. It wasn't about one missing student. This was something far more complicated, something that was pulling both him and his ex-wife into its orbit. And then, to his shock, Karen slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside was a single sheet of paper, yellowed with age. Mr. Miller unfolded it, his eyes scanning the text. It was an old police report, dated back to the early 1980s. The report described the disappearance of a woman named Rachel Doyle, a name that Mr. Miller didn't recognize. According to the document, Rachel had vanished without a trace one summer night, just like Matthew. The circumstances surrounding her disappearance were eerily similar to Matthew's: an unaccounted-for absence, no signs of a struggle, and a city left wondering what had happened. But what struck Mr. Miller the most was the mention of one other name on the report, Karen Miller. It was buried in the details, a brief mention that Karen had been one of the last people to see Rachel Doyle before she disappeared. Mr. Miller froze. He hadn't known about Rachel Doyle, or that his ex-wife had been involved in any way. How could he not have known? What was Karen hiding? And more importantly, was Rachel's disappearance somehow connected to Matthew's? Karen seemed to read his mind. "I didn't want you to find out like this," she said, her voice a mixture of guilt and fear. "It's not what you think. I was young, and I didn't know what I was getting into. But Rachel's disappearance, her case was never solved. People talked about it, but it was like everyone forgot her. Just like they're trying to forget Matthew now. But it's not the same thing. This time, I think they're not just trying to bury Matthew. They're burying something much darker." Mr. Miller's mind raced. The pieces weren't just scattered anymore, they were downright chaotic. There were too many unanswered questions. Was Karen connected to whatever happened to Rachel Doyle? Did that case somehow link to Matthew's disappearance? And why was his ex-wife suddenly pulling him into this tangled mess? He wanted answers, but the more he sought them, the more everyone around him seemed to be a potential suspect. Even Karen, who had once been a safe harbor in his life, now felt like an enigma. Was she genuinely trying to help him, or was there something more sinister at play? And the worst part, just as Mr. Miller tried to make sense of it all, he received another unsettling development. As if the weight of Karen's revelation wasn't enough, the following morning brought more proof that he wasn't just chasing shadows. His phone rang with an unknown number again. But this time, when he answered, the voice on the other end was unmistakable. It was Mrs. Langley. "You should have stopped," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You should have listened. You're in deeper than you know, and now it's too late. Just leave it alone." And then, the line went dead. But what did she mean by that? Leave it alone? Was Mrs. Langley part of whatever was happening with Rachel Doyle? Did she have ties to Matthew's disappearance as well? The more Mr. Miller tried to peel back the layers, the more they seemed to tighten around him. His life was becoming a puzzle he couldn't solve, and each step forward just revealed even more unsettling truths. The closer he got to understanding what had happened to Matthew, the more entangled he became in the web of people who seemed to want to keep their dark secrets buried. But there was one thing Mr. Miller knew for certain now: whatever had happened to Matthew, whatever he had uncovered in the last days of his life, it was connected to something much larger. This wasn't just about a missing student or a forgotten artist. It was about a conspiracy, something that had been buried for decades. And the more Mr. Miller uncovered, the more he realized that the stakes were higher than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't just chasing the past. He was uncovering a trail of lies and betrayal that threatened to destroy everything in its path. He wasn't just in danger, he was trapped, and the walls were closing in faster than he could escape. As the days blurred together in a haze of fear and confusion, Mr. Miller felt the weight of the world pressing in on him. Each new piece of evidence only added to the mystery, and every lead seemed to circle back to a dead end. He couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play, something so dark and twisted that the walls around him felt like they were closing in. Karen was gone, and the cryptic messages continued to haunt him, like whispers in the dark. Whoever was behind this, whoever had orchestrated this twisted game, had one thing in mind: to break him. But the truth, as he would soon learn, was far more complicated than he could have imagined. It all started when Mr. Miller received an unexpected call late one night. The number was blocked, and at first, he hesitated, debating whether or not to answer. The phone had already become a source of anxiety, a device that constantly seemed to bring new horrors into his life. But something inside told him to pick up. When he did, there was nothing but silence at first, deep, suffocating silence. Then, just as he was about to hang up, a voice whispered from the other end. "You don't know who you're dealing with, do you?" The words were sharp, chilling, but there was something else in that voice, something familiar. Mr. Miller's blood ran cold. He couldn't place it at first, but the voice felt oddly comforting. It was as though he had heard it before, though it had been years. His heart raced. "What do you mean? Who are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling despite his best efforts to remain calm. The voice chuckled softly, an unsettling sound that only deepened the knot in his stomach. "You've been digging for answers, haven't you? That's always been your problem. What do you want from me?" Mr. Miller's voice broke through the growing anxiety. "Nothing. I'm just here to tell you something important. Everything you think you know? It's a lie." The voice paused, letting the words hang in the air like a threat, before continuing. "The real mystery isn't about Matthew, or Karen, or any of this nonsense you've been chasing. It's about you, Miller. You've been looking in the wrong places, and now it's too late to turn back." Mr. Miller's mind reeled. What was this person talking about? He had spent every waking moment trying to connect the dots, trying to figure out what had happened to Matthew and who was behind Karen's sudden disappearance. But this call, this mysterious voice, was flipping everything he thought he knew on its head. Was he really the one being manipulated? Was he the one who had been played all along? Before he could respond, the line went dead, leaving Mr. Miller standing in the darkness of his apartment, staring at the phone in his hand. His breath came in sharp, erratic gasps as the gravity of the conversation hit him. He wasn't just in danger. He wasn't just a victim. He was part of something much bigger than he could ever have imagined. But the most disturbing part of the conversation didn't come from the voice, it came from something that had been overlooked all along. Mr. Miller had always assumed that the mystery was about Matthew. The missing student. The mysterious clues. But what if that was the distraction? What if Matthew's disappearance, Karen's sudden vanishing, even the cryptic messages, it was all designed to pull him deeper into something much more insidious? And then, like a punch to the gut, it hit him. The piece of the puzzle that had eluded him for so long was right under his nose. The key to everything was not about Matthew, not even about Rachel Doyle, not about Karen. It was about the journal, the one he had found in the abandoned classroom all those weeks ago, the one that had once belonged to Matthew. He had assumed it was just a fragment of the puzzle, a hint to a larger mystery. But now, looking back, he realized it had been the beginning of everything. It wasn't just a journal. It was Matthew's confession. A confession about everything that had led up to his disappearance. And buried within those pages was something that, when read in its entirety, would change everything. Something that pointed to the very heart of the conspiracy he had been chasing. The voice on the phone hadn't been wrong. Mr. Miller had been looking in all the wrong places. All along, the answers had been inside that journal, hidden in plain sight. And the person who had left it behind, who had planted the clue, was none other than someone he had trusted from the very beginning, someone he had believed was on his side. It was Mrs. Langley. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. Mrs. Langley, the soft-spoken librarian, the one person who had seemed to have the most knowledge about the school's history, the one who had warned him to stop searching, had been hiding something all along. She had always been too calm, too composed. And now, it made sense. She wasn't just a bystander. She had been a part of the whole thing. The journal, the strange phone call, Karen's disappearance, they had all been pieces of a much larger plan. A plan that Mrs. Langley had been orchestrating from the very beginning. But why? What was her true motive? And why had she been pulling the strings behind the scenes? Mr. Miller's head spun. He had trusted her, had even considered her an ally in his search for the truth. But now, he couldn't shake the sickening thought that he had been played. Everything he thought he knew was nothing more than a smokescreen, a carefully crafted illusion. And the worst part was, he wasn't sure who to trust anymore. Everyone around him seemed to have their own agenda. Karen, the mysterious phone call, Mrs. Langley, all of them were players in a game far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The walls were closing in on him, and for the first time since this all began, Mr. Miller realized just how deep the rabbit hole went. What had started as a search for a missing student had transformed into a nightmare where everyone had something to hide. Even those he thought were his allies. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was part of the puzzle, a pawn in a much larger game. And the worst part was, he still didn't know who the real enemy was. All he knew now was that there was no going back. The truth was more elusive than ever, and as the stakes grew higher, the people he once trusted turned out to be the very ones who had been hiding the answers all along. Mr. Miller's hands trembled as he stood in the middle of his apartment, the weight of the phone call still pressing against his chest. Mrs. Langley. The one person who had seemed so trustworthy, so invested in his search for the truth, now, she was the one pulling the strings. But why? What was her endgame? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that everything he had believed about this case, everything he had known, had been a lie. His mind raced, pieces of the puzzle falling into place with terrifying clarity. But there was something more, something darker at play that he still couldn't fully grasp. The next few hours were a blur. Mr. Miller couldn't shake the feeling that every step he took was being watched, that the walls around him were closing in even tighter. The phone call had shattered his perception of everything. But as much as his mind screamed for him to confront Mrs. Langley, to demand answers, there was something holding him back. Fear. Or was it that deep, nagging suspicion that confronting her might push him closer to the edge of a truth he wasn't ready to face? No. He couldn't wait any longer. The stakes were too high. Karen's disappearance, the cryptic messages, the hidden clues, it was all coming to a head. And he knew he couldn't back out now. He decided to go to the one place where he thought he might find answers, Mrs. Langley's house. The thought of confronting her, someone he had considered an ally, made his stomach churn, but he had no choice. He had to confront her, had to know what part she played in this twisted web of lies. When he arrived at her house, the unease gnawing at him grew even worse. It was an older home, tucked away on a quiet street, a place that seemed almost too perfect to be real, almost too normal, a stark contrast to the chaos he was now trapped in. He knocked on the door, his pulse racing in anticipation of whatever awaited him. The door creaked open slowly, and there she stood, her face giving nothing away. Mrs. Langley, always calm, always collected, looked at him with a polite but distant smile. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice smooth, almost soothing. "What brings you here?" He opened his mouth to speak, but the words felt heavy, stuck in his throat. He didn't want to accuse her, not without knowing for sure, but there was no denying the truth now. He had to ask. "What's going on, Mrs. Langley? What's the real story behind all of this?" "Karen. Matthew, the journal. I know you're involved. You can't keep hiding from this." Her smile didn't falter, but something cold flickered in her eyes. It was a look he had never seen before. A look that said she knew something he didn't, something she wasn't ready to share. For a moment, there was silence between them, an unspoken tension that felt suffocating. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. "I think you've misunderstood, Mr. Miller. I didn't pull you into this web. You did it all on your own. You've been digging for something, haven't you? Something you weren't ready to find." He felt the ground beneath him shift. "What are you talking about?" he demanded. "What's going on here? I know you're hiding something. I can't keep going in circles. People are missing, people are being threatened. I need to know the truth." Mrs. Langley's expression remained unreadable. Then, her lips curled into a smile that wasn't quite friendly, but something far colder. "You've already learned too much. That's your problem, Mr. Miller. The truth isn't something you're meant to find. And now, the clock is ticking. Before he could respond, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Mrs. Langley stepped back, allowing him to enter her home. "You've been asking all the wrong questions. You think you're close, don't you? But you're not." Her voice dropped, the warmth fading from it entirely. "You don't get to choose the ending, Mr. Miller. We all have our roles to play. But if you want answers, you'll have to make a choice." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. "What choice?" he whispered, fear creeping into his voice. His instincts screamed that this was a moment of no return. Mrs. Langley's eyes locked onto his, and in that moment, he saw something in her, a cold, calculating look that sent a chill down his spine. "You can stop now, Mr. Miller. Walk away. Forget everything. You'll be safe. No one else has to get hurt." Or, she paused, letting the silence stretch between them. "You can keep pushing, keep digging, but be warned there are consequences. Not just for you, but for everyone you care about." Her words settled over him like a suffocating fog. He could feel his chest tightening as he processed what she was saying. She was giving him an ultimatum. Walk away, and he could return to his normal life, to the safety of ignorance. Or he could continue his search, but at what cost? His mind raced through the possibilities. What if Karen's disappearance was a warning? What if someone else close to him was in danger? The thought of anyone else getting hurt, of someone else he loved disappearing like Karen, made his stomach churn with nausea. But there was another part of him, the part that had been driven by a need for truth, for answers, that refused to back down. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let it all go. "I won't stop," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "I can't. I have to know what's going on. This isn't just about me anymore." Mrs. Langley's smile faded, and for a moment, there was an eerie stillness in the room. Then, with an almost imperceptible nod, she stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter. "Then you've made your choice." The tension between them grew thicker, palpable. The choice had been made, but now, a new weight settled in Mr. Miller's chest. He was in too deep, too far down the rabbit hole. The stakes were higher than ever, and no matter what, there was no turning back. The consequences of his decision, whatever they were, would be felt by everyone around him. But as he stepped into her house, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Whatever lay ahead, it was bigger, darker, and more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. The door shut behind him with a soft click, and for the first time in a long time, Mr. Miller realized that the walls weren't just closing in, they were closing on everyone he loved. Damar. Miller had barely crossed the threshold into Mrs. Langley's house when the reality of the situation hit him like a freight train. The door slammed shut behind him with a resounding finality, and the once welcoming atmosphere of her home now felt suffocating, oppressive. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Every instinct in him screamed to turn around and flee, but his feet were glued to the floor, unable to move, unable to stop what was coming next. Mrs. Langley's presence loomed over him, her calm demeanor now a mask for something much darker. She wasn't just a bystander, she wasn't someone who had stumbled into this situation. She was the architect, the one who had set everything in motion. As she led him through the narrow hallways, past the dusty bookshelves and old portraits, Mr. Miller couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he had just made. There was no turning back. The truth was out there, somewhere, and he was willing to risk everything to find it. But in that moment, a sudden, horrible thought crossed his mind. What if the truth wasn't something he could live with? Mrs. Langley stopped at a door near the back of the house, a door that he hadn't noticed before. She didn't say a word, but her eyes told him everything he needed to know. This was the moment. This was where it all came together. He was about to learn things he wasn't prepared for, things that would shatter everything he thought he knew. She opened the door, and Mr. Miller stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, cluttered with old files and papers stacked high on a long wooden desk. But it wasn't the room's contents that caught his attention, it was the walls. The walls were covered in photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten notes, all connected by lines of red thread. It looked like the wall of a madman, a conspiracy theorist's dream. And yet, as Mr. Miller stepped closer, the pieces began to fall into place. The photos were of people he knew, people he had never suspected. His heart sank. There, in the center of the wall, was a picture of Karen, her face circled in red, a note attached to it reading the key. And next to it, another photograph, one that made Mr. Miller's blood run cold, a picture of Mrs. Langley, but she wasn't just standing there, smiling like in the other photos. She was holding a document, one that was unmistakably familiar. It was the same journal Mr. Miller had found. The same journal that had been his lifeline, the thing that had sent him down this dark and twisted path. "You've been looking at all the wrong things, Mr. Miller." Mrs. Langley's voice broke through his thoughts, smooth and steady as ever. She wasn't even fazed by his shock. "This isn't about Karen, Matthew, or any of the people you think are involved. It never was." He turned to face her, his mind spinning. "What do you mean? I don't understand. I've followed the trail. I know you're connected to it all. Why are you doing this?" Her smile was cold, almost pitying. "You think this is about a few missing people? No, Mr. Miller. This is much bigger than you realize. Much bigger than you or I. It's about power. Control. A game that's been played for decades." The weight of her words settled over him like a suffocating blanket. She wasn't just involved in this conspiracy, she was at the very heart of it. And it wasn't about one person. It was about a network, a web of influence that reached farther than he could have ever imagined. People in high places, influential figures, even members of the community he had trusted, every one of them was a player in this game. And Mr. Miller had unknowingly stepped right into the middle of it. Mrs. Langley stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor, the only sound in the heavy silence. "You've been investigating all the wrong people, Mr. Miller. You've been chasing ghosts. The truth is, there are far more people involved than you know. People you trust. People who've been controlling everything from the shadows." Before he could react, her phone rang, the sharp ring cutting through the tension in the room like a knife. She glanced at the screen, her face changing for just a moment, a flicker of something unrecognizable crossing her features. She answered it with the calm detachment that had characterized her the entire time. "Yes." Her voice was low, controlled, but Mr. Miller could tell something had changed in her demeanor. There was an undercurrent of urgency now, something he hadn't noticed before. She listened for a moment, her gaze fixed on him, and then, with a cold smile, she ended the call. "It's time, Mr. Miller. Your investigation ends now." Before he could respond, the door behind him slammed open, and in walked someone else, someone he hadn't expected. The last person he ever thought would betray him. It was Dr. Harrison, the head of the school board, the very man who had been guiding him, encouraging him to dig deeper into the mystery. The man who had offered his help, who had seemed so genuine, so trustworthy. But now, standing in the doorway, his eyes cold and calculating, Mr. Miller realized the truth. Dr. Harrison had been playing him all along. "I told you to stop, Miller," Dr. Harrison said, his voice low, dangerous. "But you didn't listen, did you? You've dug too deep. And now, you've crossed a line you can't come back from." The betrayal hit Mr. Miller like a physical blow. All along, Dr. Harrison had been part of the conspiracy, a puppet master in the background, pulling strings, manipulating him, using him as a pawn in a game he didn't fully understand. His mind reeled as the implications of the last few days settled in. The people he had trusted, people he had relied on for guidance, for support, were all part of something far darker than he had ever imagined. Mrs. Langley stepped toward Dr. Harrison, her eyes never leaving Mr. Miller. "You've been warned, Mr. Miller. It's too late to stop now. You can either walk away and forget everything, or you can face the consequences. But either way, the game is over for you." Mr. Miller's pulse raced as he realized the depth of the situation he had found himself in. He had been played from the start. Every step, every decision, had been part of a much larger plan, a plan that involved far more people than he could have ever imagined. There was no way out, no escape. He had two choices. He could walk away and live with the knowledge that his investigation had cost the lives of people he cared about, or he could keep pushing, keep digging, even if it meant exposing everything and losing everything in the process. In that moment, as the two conspirators closed in on him, the weight of the truth settled over him like a suffocating blanket. The stakes had never been higher. The danger had never felt so real. And he had never been more alone. The game had changed, and he was now a piece on the board, a piece that was about to be taken. The room felt like a trap closing in around him. Mrs. Langley and Dr. Harrison stood before him, the very people he had once trusted, now revealed as the architects of a web so twisted, so far-reaching, that it threatened to consume everything in its path. His mind raced, every part of him screaming for answers, for clarity, but all he could feel was the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. It was hard to breathe, hard to think. The air in the room was thick with tension, thick with a sense of finality that made the floor beneath him seem unstable, as though everything he knew was crumbling away beneath his feet. Mrs. Langley's cold eyes never left his as she slowly approached him, her every step deliberate, like she was savoring the moment. "You've been a pawn in this game from the start, Mr. Miller. You were never meant to uncover the truth. People like you think you can change things, but you can't. Not in a game like this." Her voice was calm, but there was something deeply unsettling about the way she spoke. It wasn't just that she was confident, it was the way she knew everything, the way she had planned for every possible move he might make. Mr. Miller's breath quickened, his heart pounding in his chest. The pieces were falling into place now, but it felt like they were all wrong. It didn't make sense. The journal. Karen's disappearance. The cryptic messages. Dr. Harrison's sudden involvement. It was all connected, but the truth was so vast, so complex, that it seemed impossible to grasp. How had he missed it? How had he allowed himself to be so blind? Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his face unreadable, but his eyes were cold, calculating. "You should have stopped when you had the chance, Miller. You've pushed too far. We warned you. Now, you'll see the truth, but it'll be the last thing you'll ever understand." Mr. Miller took a step back, his mind racing. He was cornered. He couldn't escape. There was nowhere to run. But in that moment, something snapped inside him. He wasn't just going to let them get away with this. No matter how deep the conspiracy ran, no matter how dangerous it had become, he had to fight back. He had come too far. He had seen too much. The truth had to come out, no matter the cost. "You're wrong," he said, his voice shaking but determined. "I'm not a pawn. And neither are the people you've hurt. I'm going to expose everything, every last part of this twisted game you've been playing." Mrs. Langley's lips curled into a smirk, but there was a flicker of something, fear, perhaps, in her eyes. "You really don't understand, do you? You think you're in control, but you're not. This is bigger than you. Bigger than anything you've ever imagined." Suddenly, the door behind them burst open, and Mr. Miller's blood ran cold. It wasn't just a random person standing in the doorway, breathless and terrified, was Karen. The very woman whose disappearance had set this entire nightmare in motion. But she wasn't the same. Her face was pale, gaunt, as though she had been living a nightmare of her own. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "It's not what you think, Mr. Miller." Karen's voice trembled as she stepped into the room. "They didn't want me to leave. They kept me locked up, kept me in the dark. I didn't know." Before she could say another word, Dr. Harrison moved swiftly, grabbing her by the arm, forcing her to stop. "Enough." His voice was sharp, commanding. "You're ruining everything." But Karen didn't resist. Instead, she looked directly at Mr. Miller, her eyes filled with a kind of regret he couldn't comprehend. "I didn't have a choice. You have to understand. I couldn't just leave." The room fell silent as Mrs. Langley turned to Dr. Harrison, a look of disgust in her eyes. "You've done your part. Now, leave us." Dr. Harrison gave her a cold, almost resentful look, but obeyed. As he stepped back toward the door, his face contorted in frustration. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but it's never over." And with that, he was gone, leaving Mrs. Langley, Karen, and Mr. Miller alone in the dimly lit room. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing them in. Mr. Miller turned to Karen, his heart pounding. "What happened to you? Why didn't you come to me? Why didn't you tell me everything?" Karen's lips trembled as she looked down at the floor. She seemed almost as if she were a ghost, a shadow of the person he once knew. "I tried to, but I couldn't. They threatened everyone I loved. They told me they would make sure you never found out the truth. And they were right. You were getting too close. Suddenly, Mrs. Langley's voice cut through the tension. This isn't about Karen, Mr. Miller. This isn't about you or her. It's about something much bigger. It's about control. And now, you've put us in a position where we have to make a choice. Mr. Miller's pulse quickened. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but they were forming an image that he couldn't bear to see. What do you mean? What choice? Mrs. Langley smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile of someone who had already won. The journal, the missing people, the disappearances, it was never just about them. It was about you, Mr. Miller. You're the final piece. The only person who could ruin everything. His heart skipped a beat. What are you talking about? What's so important about me? You have something we need, Mrs. Langley said, her voice growing colder, more insistent. That journal, it's not just a record of events. It's a key. A key to something much more dangerous than you can understand. And now, we need you to make the final choice. In that moment, Mr. Miller felt a chill run through him, the room suddenly spinning. He had been holding the key all along. The journal he had thought was just a clue, just a piece of the puzzle, was the actual puzzle. The answers it held weren't just about the people who had disappeared. It was about them, the ones who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. And now, they were trying to control him. I won't be part of this, he said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. I won't let you use me. I won't let you turn me into one of your pawns. Mrs. Langley's smile faded, her eyes narrowing. You don't have a choice. But as she took a step closer, there was a sharp crack like the sound of glass breaking, and in that split second, everything changed. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with a deafening clarity. The real enemy wasn't just Mrs. Langley or Dr. Harrison. It was something far deeper. Far darker. Something Mr. Miller had never even considered. Karen suddenly stepped forward, her eyes wide with realization. It's not just them, Mr. Miller. It's us. All of us. We're part of it now. We always have been.